the guest that made Johnny Carson cry on air. For 30 years, Johnny Carson showed everyone he was super calm and never got upset. He was the host of The Tonight Show, and he acted like nothing ever bothered him. He was always friendly and professional, and he kept his feelings hidden like a secret. This made him the perfect person for people to watch late at night on TV. Night after night, famous person after famous person, Carson stayed cool and calm. He paid attention to his guests and stayed in control no matter what happened. This carefully practiced calmness made those rare times when Carson got emotional even more special and powerful. On TV, more and more shows were trying to make people cry on purpose, but Carson's tears were never fake or planned. They were real, surprising moments when this man who was so good at controlling himself just couldn't hold it in anymore. Johnny thought showing feelings on TV was unprofessional, said a producer who worked on The Tonight Show for over 10 years. He grew up in the Midwest where men weren't supposed to show when they were sad or hurt. When something made him cry on camera, it wasn't just touching. It was like getting to peek behind a curtain and see the real person who worked really hard to stay calm. Today, we're talking about the 7 amazing times when TV's most controlled person found himself getting too emotional to hide it. When his perfect professional mask cracked open to show the man with deep feelings underneath. These rare times caught on camera, even though Carson tried his best to stay calm, give us a special look into the real personality of the man who changed late-night TV for many years. But first, we need to understand why our first story had such a big emotional impact. A moment so real and unexpected that people have watched it over and over again, showing us how much feeling Carson had behind his carefully controlled outside appearance. There are nights when I think I feel him climb upon her bed. Number 1. Jimmy Stewart, Bo, The Dog Poem, 1981. Jimmy Stewart was already super famous when he came on The Tonight Show in 1981. The legendary actor who was in classic movies like It's a Wonderful Life and Vertigo had been on Carson's show many times and people loved him. They got along really well because they respected each other and both grew up in the Midwest. But nobody, especially not Carson himself, expected this visit to create one of the most emotional moments in the show's history. Johnny had no warning about what Jimmy was going to share, said a producer who worked on the show that night. We knew Stewart wanted to read something he wrote, but nobody told us what it was about before the show. If Johnny had known, he might have prepared himself for the feelings, but he was completely surprised. The segment started out normal, with Carson and Stewart having their usual friendly conversation. Then, almost like it was no big deal, Stewart mentioned he had written a poem about his golden retriever, Bo, who had died recently. When Carson asked him to share it, nobody knew how emotional things were about to get. Stewart, speaking in his gentle, slow way, started to read. The poem talked about his relationship with Bo, the dog's habits, what they did every night together, and finally the huge emptiness Stewart felt after Bo died. As Stewart's voice got more and more emotional while reading, cameras caught something amazing. Johnny Carson, the master of staying calm on TV, wiping tears from his eyes. You could have heard a pin drop in the studio, remembered a camera guy who was there that night. Stewart's reading was so raw and real, and then we all saw Johnny's reaction. He was trying to hide it, quickly wiping his eyes, looking down. But there was no question about it. Carson was crying on national television. What made the moment extra powerful was watching Carson struggle inside. He clearly didn't expect to get so emotional, and viewers watched as he fought between wanting to stay professional and calm versus his real feelings about Stewart's heartfelt words. Johnny loved dogs too, explained a friend of Carson's who was backstage that night. But it wasn't just about dogs. It was watching Jimmy Stewart, this American hero known for being dignified and strong, letting himself be vulnerable and share his feelings. Johnny told me later that Stewart being willing to share such raw emotion gave him permission to react for real, too. When Stewart finished reading, Carson tried to go to a commercial break, but his voice cracked when he spoke. It was a moment of real humanity from a man who rarely let people see this side of him, and the audience loved it. The phone lines at the TV station went crazy after that aired, said an NBC boss. We got thousands of calls and letters in the next few days. People weren't just moved by Stewart's poem, they were touched seeing Johnny let his guard down. Many viewers said it was the first time they ever saw him as a real person instead of just a TV host. The segment has become one of the most replayed moments in Tonight Show history. People watch it over and over in compilations of Carson's best interviews. Its power comes not just from Stewart's moving tribute to his beloved pet, but from the rare look it gave into the real emotional life of a man who built his career on controlled friendliness. Carson later told close friends, "Jimmy Stewart got me that night. Completely caught me off guard. Some things just go straight to your heart and there's nothing you can do about it." Anxious to close. Number 2, Bette Midler, Carson's final week. 1992, after almost 30 years and over 4,500 episodes, Johnny Carson's time as host of The Tonight Show was ending in May 1992. His final week of shows had been carefully planned as a perfect ending to TV's longest-running and most successful late-night show. What hadn't been planned, what couldn't have been set up, was the emotional moment that would happen when Bette Midler came on his second-to-last show. "There was already a lot of emotion that whole week," explained a director who worked on Carson's final episodes. Everyone, the crew, the staff, the audience, felt like they were watching TV history happen. Johnny was acting professional like always, but you could tell he was thinking about how big a deal it was to say goodbye to a show that had been his whole life for 3 decades. Midler, already known for her powerful singing and big personality, was booked as one of Carson's final guests. The segment started with the usual interview, but near the end, Midler said she wanted to sing a song for Carson. When the band started playing One for My Baby and One More for the Road, the feeling in the studio completely changed. The song choice was perfect. "A bar song about last calls and goodbyes," said a music director who was there that night. But what made it extraordinary was how Bette turned it from just a performance into a real goodbye. She wasn't singing to the audience. She was singing directly to Johnny, and you could see on his face the exact moment he realized this wasn't just entertainment. It was a personal goodbye. As Midler's powerful voice filled the studio with the sad farewell song, cameras caught Carson's expression changing. His professional mask slipped, showing a man clearly moved by this musical goodbye to his leaving. He looked away from the camera several times, obviously trying hard to stay calm. "Johnny was fighting it hard," remembered a camera operator who was focused on Carson during the performance. "You could see him swallowing a lot, blinking more than normal, all those little signs of someone working not to cry on camera. But by the end, he was losing that fight. When she finished the song and walked toward him, his eyes were definitely wet." The moment ended with Midler and Carson hugging in a way that said more than words ever could. When Carson tried to say his closing words for the segment, his voice noticeably choked up. Another rare crack in the calm appearance he had kept up for thousands of shows. "That wasn't just Johnny being moved by a beautiful performance," said a producer who had worked with Carson for over a decade. "That was a man facing the end of the most important part of his life." Bette gave him the gift of recognizing how emotional that moment was, something Johnny himself would have been too reserved to say out loud. The segment became instantly famous, replayed many times in the years since as the emotional high point of Carson's goodbye week. Its power comes from how real it was, a genuine moment of vulnerability from TV's most controlled personality, captured during one of the biggest changes in TV history. On TV, where more and more things felt fake, Carson's visible emotion during Midler's performance shows us those rare times when television captures something genuinely moving, when even the calmest professional can't help but respond for real to a moment of true emotional power. 'Cause he is both, and he's got a new picture out right now called The Fisher King. Would you welcome Robin Williams? Number 3, Robin Williams, after the death of Carson's son, 1991. In June 1991, Carson went through a terrible personal tragedy when his son Rick was killed in a car accident. The 39-year-old Rick had been taking pictures on a curvy road near Malibu, California, when his car went down a cliff. The loss was a huge blow to Carson, who briefly talked about it on air in his usual controlled way before going back to his job. Johnny mentioned Rick's death at the start of his first show back, thanking viewers for their kind words, but that was it, said a writer who worked on the show during this time. He didn't want to use his personal tragedy as content for the show. That was Johnny. He believed his job was to entertain people, not to deal with his sadness publicly. This commitment to being professional made what happened during Robin Williams' next appearance even more powerful. Williams, known for his crazy energy and super-fast comedy, showed a different side when he visited The Tonight Show shortly after Carson came back to work. Robin immediately understood the situation needed a different approach, explained a person who helped prepare for the appearance. He was usually this hurricane of energy, but he came in with a completely different mindset that night. He told us backstage, "I'm not here to do my usual thing. I'm here to support Johnny." The interview started with Williams' usual humor, but at a noticeably slower pace. As the segment went on, viewers saw something remarkable. Williams slowly adjusting his performance, creating moments of real connection mixed in with the comedy. Near the end of their conversation, Williams gently acknowledged Carson's loss without directly saying it. A subtle but clear message of support. It was masterfully done, remembered a director who worked that night. Robin found this perfect balance. He gave the audience the comedy they expected while creating space for genuine human connection with someone who was grieving. And Johnny, who never let his guard down, had this moment where everything just showed on his face. That moment, caught in a close-up that network cameras usually avoided during emotional displays, showed Carson's eyes clearly watering as Williams expressed through words and body language his understanding of Carson's pain. It was a quick but powerful glimpse of real vulnerability from TV's most controlled personality. Johnny never directly talked about what happened with Robin that night, said a longtime colleague of Carson's, but several staff members heard him say, "Robin understood exactly what I needed tonight." It was high praise from someone who rarely commented on guests' performances. What made the moment especially significant was how it showed a perfect meeting of two very different performance styles. Williams, known for emotional openness and endless energy, found a way to connect with Carson, the master of restraint and controlled behavior. In that brief moment, viewers witnessed something rarely seen on TV: real emotional support given through the artificial setting of a talk show interview. The segment is rarely shown in clip compilations, maybe out of respect for the private nature of Carson's grief. But those who saw it remember it as one of the most genuinely human moments in the show's 3-decade history, a time when entertainment gave way to something deeper, and when even Johnny Carson couldn't keep the emotional distance he usually worked so hard to maintain. That in trying to be very nice, they say a lot of things that no human being alive could live up to. Number 4, Sammy Davis Jr., post-cancer appearance. Sammy Davis Jr. had been on The Tonight Show all the time throughout Carson's years as host, always bringing his energy, talent, and charm to his appearances. The legendary entertainer had developed a warm friendship with Carson over the years, and their chemistry on air made for reliably fun television. But when Davis came on the show after treatment for throat cancer, the typical showbiz talk gave way to something far more emotionally powerful. "Everyone backstage was shocked by Sammy's appearance when he arrived," said a production assistant who worked that night. He had lost so much weight, and the surgery and radiation had clearly taken a huge toll on him. There were actually discussions about whether the appearance should happen, but Sammy insisted. He said, "The public needs to see what cancer looks like. I'm not hiding." Carson, who had been told about Davis's condition, was still clearly shaken when he first saw his longtime friend walk onto the stage. Though he kept his professional manner, viewers could see the shock and concern in his expression as he welcomed Davis to the show. "Johnny was clearly fighting his emotions from the moment Sammy appeared," explained a camera operator who was focused on Carson during the entrance. His hands were held together more tightly than usual, and there was this slight shake in his voice during the introduction. For someone who prided himself on staying calm, these were big signs. What made the segment especially moving was Davis's determination to be honest about his condition while still trying to entertain on the show. Despite how weak he was, he insisted on singing a short song, his voice noticeably affected by the cancer treatment, but his commitment to art unchanged. When Sammy started to sing, you could see Johnny just break a little, remembered a director who worked that night. Carson had this amazing poker face he'd developed over decades on television. But watching his friend, this incredible talent, struggle physically while still giving everything he had as an artist, it cracked that facade. His eyes filled with tears, and he didn't even try to hide it. The emotional peak came near the end of the interview when Davis thanked Carson for never abandoning him during Davis's career, acknowledging the host's long support during times when racial barriers still significantly limited opportunities for black entertainers. Carson, clearly moved, tried to respond but found his voice breaking. It was a rare moment of visible emotion from TV's most controlled personality. "That thank you from Sammy wasn't scripted or planned," said a segment producer. It was a genuine expression of gratitude from one professional to another, and Johnny's reaction was equally genuine. He was truly touched by this acknowledgement from someone he deeply respected, especially given the circumstances. The power of the moment was made bigger by the knowledge shared by both men, though not spoken out loud, that this might be Davis's final appearance on the show. This unspoken understanding gave every exchange an additional layer of emotional weight that viewers could feel. After the segment, Johnny took a longer than usual commercial break, revealed a stage manager who was present. He went back to his office briefly, and when he returned, you could tell he had taken a moment to compose himself. That almost never happened. Johnny prided himself on being able to move seamlessly between segments. No matter what had just happened, Davis would come on The Tonight Show one more time before his death in 1990. But it was this post-cancer interview that most showed the depth of friendship and respect between the two entertainment legends, and that gave viewers a rare glimpse of Carson's emotional vulnerability beneath his carefully maintained professional exterior. "I am one of the lucky people in the world. I found something I always wanted to do, and I have enjoyed every single minute of it." Number 5, James Stewart, Carson's final show, phone call. As Johnny Carson's legendary 30-year run on The Tonight Show drew to a close on May 22, 1992, the final show was carefully planned to give a fitting ending to TV's most successful late-night program. While most of the Goodbye Show had Carson alone on stage, looking back and showing highlights from previous years, there was one unplanned moment that caught the usually calm host off guard, an unexpected phone call from his longtime friend Jimmy Stewart. "The call wasn't on the plan for the final show," explained a producer who worked on Carson's Goodbye Show. "We had specifically decided against having guests that night. Johnny wanted to speak directly to his audience without the usual interview format. The call from Stewart was set up very last minute, and Carson had no idea it was coming. As Carson was thinking back on his 3 decades as host, he was interrupted by a phone call. When he answered, Jimmy Stewart's instantly recognizable voice filled the studio. The surprise was clear on Carson's face as he realized who was calling to wish him goodbye. "You could see Johnny's entire mood change the moment he heard Stewart's voice," said a director who was in the control room that night. His eyes got big and the smile spread across his face. Not his professional host smile, but this genuine expression of happiness. These were 2 men with tremendous respect for each other, and that real connection was immediately visible. What followed was a short but emotionally charged conversation between 2 American icons. Stewart, his voice showing his old age, but still carrying that distinctive hesitant quality, expressed his admiration for Carson's accomplishments and his personal appreciation for their friendship over the years. "Johnny was fighting to stay calm throughout the call," said a camera operator who was focused on Carson during the exchange. "He kept nodding instead of speaking at certain points, which those of us who had worked with him recognized as something he did when he was too emotional to trust his voice. There was this moment near the end of their conversation where he just fell silent, and that pause said everything about what Stewart's friendship meant to him. When Carson finally responded to Stewart's good wishes, viewers could hear the subtle but unmistakable emotion in his voice, a slight hoarseness, a barely noticeable tremor that showed the feelings beneath his controlled exterior. For a man who had built his career on unshakable calm, even this small display of emotion was significant. That call hit Johnny in a way nothing else did during the finale, remembered a longtime colleague who was backstage that night. He had prepared himself emotionally for the Goodbye Show, had come to terms with ending this chapter of his life. But hearing from Stewart, who represented an older generation of entertainers that Carson deeply respected, caught him off guard. It was the personal nature of it, Not a scripted segment, but a genuine moment between friends. What made the exchange particularly powerful was how it connected two entertainment legends at such a meaningful moment in television history. Those little lions, the little baby lions, were 1 year old. That's right. They are now dangerous and fierce 10-year-old animals. Number 6, Ed McMahon, Farewell Tribute, 1992. For 30 years, Ed McMahon had been Johnny Carson's sidekick, announcer, and straight man on The Tonight Show. Their professional partnership, one of the longest and most successful in TV history, had turned into a genuine friendship that was the foundation for thousands of shows. When the time came for Carson's goodbye in May 1992, McMahon's tribute to his longtime colleague created one of the most emotionally charged moments in the show's final week. Ed had been preparing what he wanted to say for weeks, revealed a producer who worked closely with McMahon during the final days of the show. He understood better than anyone how historically significant this ending was, and he felt a huge responsibility to find the right words to honor not just their professional partnership, but their personal friendship. The moment came during Carson's second-to-last show. McMahon, stepping away from his usual role as the loud announcer, used a more thoughtful tone as he began to speak directly to Carson about their 3 decades together. As McMahon told stories from their early days and expressed his gratitude for their partnership, viewers witnessed something remarkable. Carson, TV's master of staying calm, struggling to keep his professional manner. Johnny was clearly not expecting the emotional weight of what Ed was saying, said a camera operator who was focused on Carson during McMahon's tribute. You could see him swallowing hard, blinking rapidly, all those subtle signs of someone working to keep their emotions in check. He kept nodding slightly, which was his way of acknowledging Ed's words without trusting himself to speak. What made the moment especially powerful was watching McMahon himself becoming emotional as he spoke. The man whose booming, "Here's Johnny," had opened the show for 3 decades found his own voice cracking as he thanked Carson for their friendship. This visible emotion from his longtime partner seemed to affect Carson even more, whose eyes clearly filled with tears. There was this moment where their eyes met, and something passed between them that went beyond words, remembered a director who was in the control booth that night. These were 2 men who had spent more time together than most marriages last, who had created this incredible body of work as a team, and who were now acknowledging that it was coming to an end. The emotion in the studio was palpable. Carson, clearly moved but determined to keep some version of his typical restraint, tried to lighten the moment with humor. But even as he told a joke in response, viewers could see that the emotion stayed just beneath the surface. His voice slightly less steady than usual, his timing just a beat off from his normal, perfect delivery. What people at home might not have fully appreciated was how rare it was to see Johnny affected like that, explained a longtime staff writer. This was a man who prided himself on never letting his guard down professionally. To see him visibly moved, to watch him fighting to maintain composure, was to understand just how significant his relationship with Ed truly was. The power of the moment was made bigger by knowing that this partnership, this nightly tradition that had defined American television for a generation, was ending. McMahon's tribute wasn't just acknowledging their personal relationship, but marking the end of a cultural institution that had shaped late-night entertainment for 3 decades. After the segment, during the commercial break, Johnny and Ed shared this brief moment together off camera, said a stage manager who was present. No words, just this quick handshake that turned into a half-hug. For 2 men of their generation who grew up in an era where men didn't openly show affection, it spoke volumes about what they meant to each other. In a goodbye week filled with emotional moments, McMahon's tribute stands out as especially significant, not just for the genuine feeling it displayed, but for how it revealed the depth of a partnership that had entertained millions while creating one of TV's most enduring friendships. And I love my dad and James Stewart. They were the same person in a way. And then, last night we were number 7, Carol Burnett, Emotional Tribute. Carol Burnett had been a Tonight Show favorite throughout Carson's time as host. Her quick wit and genuine warmth made her one of the host's most welcome returning guests. The mutual respect between these two TV legends was clear in their easy back and forth and the obvious pleasure Carson got from her appearances. When Burnett made her final visit during Carson's Goodbye season in 1992, what started as a typical comedy segment turned into an unexpectedly moving tribute that caught the normally calm host off guard. "Carol hadn't planned anything particularly emotional," explained a segment producer who worked on the appearance. "She came prepared with her usual funny stories and the kind of comedy bits she and Johnny had perfected over the years. The emotional moment was completely spontaneous, which is why it affected Carson so deeply." The interview started normally, with Burnett sharing stories and doing the comfortable back and forth that had characterized their many previous times together. But as the segment got close to ending, Burnett suddenly changed her tone, speaking to Carson directly about what his support had meant to her career and expressing her personal appreciation for their friendship over the decades. "It wasn't a prepared speech. That's what made it so powerful," said a writer who was there that night. "Carol just started speaking from the heart about Johnny's impact, not just on her career, but on American entertainment as a whole. It was this beautiful, sincere acknowledgement of his legacy, and you could see it caught him completely by surprise." As Burnett continued her impromptu tribute, cameras caught Carson's reaction, a man clearly moved, but fighting to keep his characteristic calm. His eyes noticeably filled with tears as Burnett spoke about specific times when his support had made a difference in her career. Moments that Carson himself had probably never thought twice about, but that had meant everything to a fellow performer. Johnny had this tell when he was emotional. He would clear his throat and adjust his tie, said a camera operator who had worked with Carson for years. He did both during Carol's remarks. For anyone else, it might have seemed like nothing. But for those of us who knew Carson's typical on-air composure, it was like watching a dam about to break. What made the moment particularly touching was how it showed a public acknowledgement of a professional generosity that Carson typically did privately. Throughout his career, Carson had used his platform to help comedians and performers he respected, often without drawing attention to his own role in helping their careers. "Carol was giving voice to what so many performers felt about Johnny," explained a longtime Tonight Show staff member. "He had this enormous power to make or break careers, and he consistently used it to support talent he believed in, but he never took credit for it publicly." Hearing Carol acknowledge that support and watching Johnny process that recognition in real time was incredibly moving. When Burnett finished her remarks, Carson tried to respond with his typical light humor, but viewers could hear the emotion in his voice. A slight hoarseness, a barely noticeable tremor that showed the feelings beneath his controlled exterior. It was a rare glimpse of the genuine man behind the polished TV persona. After the segment, Johnny took a moment in his office before the next guest, revealed a stage manager. When he came back out, he mentioned to one of the producers, "Carol got me there." Coming from Carson, who rarely acknowledged emotional displays, it was a significant admission. The Burnett tribute became one of the emotional highlights of Carson's Goodbye season, not because it was the most openly tearful moment, but because it represented a real acknowledgement of Carson's impact from a peer he respected. In a medium often criticized for fake sentiment, this spontaneous expression of genuine appreciation created a moment of true emotional connection that even TV's most composed host couldn't entirely hide. These 7 emotional moments show a side of Johnny Carson that viewers rarely saw during his 3 decades on air. Beneath the unshakable exterior was a man of deep feeling who occasionally found himself moved beyond his carefully kept professional composure. In these brief instances, when Carson's emotional guard dropped, audiences got quick but powerful insights into the genuine person behind the TV legend. What makes these moments especially significant is how real they were. In an era of TV increasingly defined by manufactured sentiment and calculated emotional displays, Carson's tears were never strategic or fake. They were genuine reactions that he actually tried to hold back, following the generational and personal code that viewed public emotion as something to be controlled rather than indulged. This tension between Carson's genuine feelings and his professional determination to stay calm adds a touching dimension to each of these moments. Viewers weren't just seeing emotional displays. They were watching a normally controlled personality struggling with the unexpected power of his own reactions. These weren't tears shed easily or for effect. They were emotions so genuine they broke through Carson's considerable defenses. Perhaps most telling is what moved Carson to these rare displays. Tributes from respected colleagues, acknowledgments of deep friendship, artistic expressions that touched on universal human experiences of loss and connection. Unlike many TV personalities who might be moved by calculated tearjerkers, Carson responded to authentic human moments that recognized the value of genuine relationships and honest emotional expression.